Okay. So where we left off, so we talked about ecosystems and the different categories and producers, consumers, food webs, food chains, energy pyramids. I'm going to finish up with a few other topics that are a part of ecology. This first one is what we call symbiosis, symbiotic relationships. These are when two organisms live very close with or in or on each other and have some sort of relationship. And so we'll talk about, there's sort of three categories of this. First one is called mutualism. What does that mean if something is mutual? Like if somebody said feelings mutual, or yes, it means like they both are getting the same, feel the same way. So mutualism is a relationship when two organisms live very close to each other and they both benefit. They both get something positive out of this relationship. What about it? Yeah, sometimes we'll talk about some. I'm going to talk about some examples. That's a good examples, like the fish that follows the shark around. That might be a different category, and we'll talk about that. So one example of this, a termite. Do you know anything about termites? Yeah, they ingest wood. They're really, you don't want termites in your house or in anything. Yeah, because they eat the wood. Nate, did you have a question? Oh yeah, you want to borrow one or you got one? Okay. Um, so termites are a tiny little insect, and they can chew up wood, but actually they can't digest it. Almost nothing can digest wood. Sort of, but the owl can digest parts of its prey. The termite eats the wood, but it can't digest it itself. But living inside of its gut is a small protist that actually can digest the wood. And so the termite chews up the wood, swallows it. In its gut, this protist breaks down the wood, but the termite gets some nutrients from it. And so they're both benefiting. The termite's getting the nutrients from eating the wood that it couldn't otherwise get. And the protist is getting a nice little home. The termite gets all the food for it. So it's benefiting also. So this is an example of both organisms benefiting. There's other examples like what's that? Yeah, the Nile crocodile is a crocodile, lives in northern Africa, and it's like a ferocious predator. It eats, it's a carnivore, eats lots of different things. But there's this one small bird called the Egyptian plover. And the crocodile opens up its mouth, it lets this bird come into its mouth and peck around. And the reason is because they have evolved this mutualistic relationship. They both are benefiting from it. What's the crocodile getting? Yeah, clean teeth that help its teeth stay healthy and not get infected. What's the bird get? Yeah, it eats that stuff it pecks out of its teeth. So they're both benefiting. They've evolved to have this relationship that we call mutualism. There's another version of this called commensalism. This is when one organism is still benefiting, but the other one isn't affected. It's not helped at all. It's not harmed, but it's not really helped. Yeah, not really. They kind of look, they don't look great. Maybe they could slow it down a bit, but like these are barnacles, right? The barnacles are these aquatic organisms that attach to something and they're filter feeders. They filter the water and get little bits of stuff out of it. Some of the barnacles attach to whales and they kind of hitch a ride. You can see it on the flipper of this whale. You can see these barnacles. It's not hurting the whale. It's not helping the whale, but the barnacle is benefiting. So this is called commensalism. When one organism benefits and the other is just not really affected. The last one is one you're probably familiar with, is parasitism. Not quite, but I'll talk about that. So in parasitism, two organisms have this close relationship and one benefits, but what about the other one? That just doesn't. Well, it's actually harmed in some way. So parasitism, the parasite benefits, what do we call it? The other organism. Yeah. There's another term we often would use. It's host. The parasite benefits, but its host is actually harmed. Not really. Not we're not because a spider is more of a predator. These are things that they live close together. Like this thing you thought was a leech, Isaiah. It's actually a lamprey. It's not quite a leech, but it acts just like one. A lamprey is a fish, and this is its mouth. So these lamprey fish, they live around here. You can find them in big lakes. I've seen them before. Um, what they do is they find big fish, like this is a lake trout, and they go and see this around their mouth. This it's like almost like a suction, and they have these ridges of teeth in their mouth, and their tongue even has teeth on it. And they basically drill a hole into the side of the fish, and they live off. They stay attached to it, and they live off of its blood. So here, this lamprey, this lake trout has two lamprey attached to it. Sometimes if you're fishing and you catch a large fish like this, even if you don't see a lamprey, you sometimes can see the wounds that the lamprey left in these fish. So the lamprey is benefiting. It's getting nutrients from eating the blood of this organism. The lamprey, or the fish, I'm sorry, is harmed, right? It's hurting it. It's getting blood out of it. The wound can be infected. It takes nutrients and energy away from it. So this is an example of parasitism. Yeah. A leech would be another example, Isaiah, which acts in kind of a similar manner. A tick that burrows under the skin of an animal and consumes its blood. The tick is benefiting, but its host can get infected, can get an infection, and so it's being harmed. Have you ever heard of a tapeworm? Tapeworms are parasitic worms. They live in the digestive tract of an animal, and as the animal eats, the tapeworm consumes some of what they've eaten. Ringworm is not a real worm. A ringworm is actually just a fungus. It's a fungal infection. There's roundworms that are parasites. Once when my dog had tapeworms, I didn't really know too much. I never really had a dog. Yeah. And when we first got our dog, when we moved into our new house, she went to the bathroom and I looked down, and on the little present she left me was actually a tiny little white, it looked like the size of a grain of rice. And I could see it was moving around on top of the poop she left. And so I knew what it was. I'd never seen it before. So we called the vet, and she just got a one pill medication that we gave her, and she was fine. Another story, my another dog, then after that dog, we got a different dog, a little Chihuahua, and she was tiny. She's only, even when she was full grown, she's about this big. But when she was a puppy, she was really, really small. And for some reason, we got her early before you usually get a dog to adopt. And so she hadn't been dewormed yet. Almost all puppies get infected with parasitic worms soon after they're born. So usually before you get them from a breeder or adopt them from a rescue, they are dewormed, which means they are given a medication, it kills the worms, and they come out. We had to give it to our dog. And so we gave her this pill, or two pills, I think it was. And then every time for the next like 3 days, she went to the bathroom. It looked like a plate of spaghetti because there were so many worms inside of her, and they all come out when the dog goes to the bathroom. It was really gross. I couldn't believe how many worms came out of this little tiny puppy. Usually they do that at the breeder. You don't see that part, but they do that for all dogs when they're adopted. Yeah. Or if you ever had a pet and you give them heart guards, those little, it looks like a treat you would give your dog. It's actually a medicine. That's a medicine to prevent a different type of parasite, a heartworm. Heard of it? Heartworms are parasitic worms that live in a dog's heart. And if they grow and reproduce, they can clog up the dog's heart, and eventually it can kill the dog. So that's why you give dogs that medicine, is to prevent them from getting infected with that heartworm. It could be. Yeah, there's many types of parasites. There's parasites that live in pigs, and their eggs can actually be in like pork. And if you didn't cook the pork properly and it happened to have these eggs, you can get this worm. It actually makes its way into your brain and lays eggs there. It can be and kill a person. There's parasitic worms that cause elephantiasis, which clog up the lymphatic. There's all types of parasites. There's some really nasty ones, and luckily not too many people where we live get infected by those parasites. But in some parts of the world, parasites like this are much more common. You think so? I used to have in my old slides, I had pictures of heartworm and tapeworms and stuff. Okay, we'll move on to a whole separate. So those are called symbiotic relationships, close relationship. The last part of our second last part of this section is what we call material cycle or nutrient cycles. So if we think about an ecosystem, right, an area of living things and their environment, the non-living things, there's lots of components of it. Yeah, or even just a forest out here, right? This forest out here, the trees are taking in carbon dioxide, the animals are taking in oxygen, there's nitrogen in the soil that the trees are taking in, there's phosphorus, there's dead squirrels that are breaking down. There's lots of stuff going on. And all of those things are part of these cycles where materials are moved through different things. Name. You need a pass for anything? Okay. All right, see you later. So some examples of these cycles. So matter gets recycled over and over again, right? The water you drank at lunch could have been in the air a week ago, and it could have been in squirrel urine 2 weeks before that. The water molecules just gets kind of recycled over and over again through different forms. Yes, Isaiah's holding a whole bottle of squirrel urine over there. And that's what happens in ecosystems. We got two bottles. So we can understand this by sort of, I did. Hey, how you doing? Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll look there in my car. I'll look on my free box. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's think about the water cycle. So if we imagine this big ecosystem, right? There's water in lakes. There's water in the ocean. Some of that water evaporates and it goes into the atmosphere. Eventually it might rain and precipitation brings that water back down. Plants might take in that water. Humans drink that water. And so water gets recycled over and over and over again in this ecosystem. Same thing with oxygen, carbon dioxide. All matter is recycled over and over again. One thing that's important is decomposers as well, because when a squirrel out there has been living its life, eating, so forth, inside of its body's tissue, there's materials locked up, carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus. Eventually, when that squirrel dies, what happens to it? What does that mean, goes away? Yeah, it breaks down, it decomposes, and what's happening is fungi, bacteria are breaking it down, and its nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, is going back into the soil, and then it's going to be taken up by another animal or plant, can take in that phosphorus, and animals can eat that, and they get it. So these materials are recycled over and over and over again. Here's nitrogen. Right? Nitrogen is in the atmosphere, okay, in the form of N2, a gas. Most of our atmosphere is nitrogen. Only very few things can actually take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and use it. The things that can are these special types of bacteria. They're called nitrogen fixing bacteria. They take the nitrogen from the air, turn it into a form in the soil that plants can use. And then plants take in that nitrogen. We can get nitrogen by eating those plants or eating animals which have eaten the plant. Eventually, decomposers return it back to the soil. So this material is cycled over and over and over again. I mean, sometimes it happens quick, like, oxygen and carbon dioxide get recycled pretty quickly. Other materials are more slowly. It just sort of depends on what the material is. All right. And then our last topic here is this process of succession. Oh, we have that after this? Oh, yeah. Succession. Let's say in your backyard. What's your backyard look like? Grass? Okay. Do you have any grass? No grass in your backyard? Okay. Imagine that there was, okay, let's say in the front yard, you just have some grass. Okay, let's say you stopped doing anything to that grass. You stopped mowing it, you just let it be. What would it look like by the end of the summer? Well, it might be tall. Probably won't die. It'll probably stay tall. All right, what about in 5 years? Is it going to stay grass, like a long grass forever? No, it might not die. It might change. Okay. Well, what if we came back 50 years later? Is your front yard just going to be long grass? Like what? What kind of stuff? Yeah. What else? Yeah. No, we're saying there's no one. We're just leaving it. Yeah, you're right, Isaiah. Is that in our area, if we stop disturbing the ecosystem, eventually, over a period of 50, 75, 100 years, it's going to return back to a forest, probably like your backyard looks like in the ravine, right? Probably like that out there, right? Our ecosystem that typically we find, if it's undisturbed, are forests, right? Beech trees, birch trees, maple trees. That's our typical ecosystem around here. And so the process that we can go from your front yard to a forest, the changes that happen in that ecosystem, that's what succession is. Succession is the change in the community over a period of time. Because species replace each other, right? Your grass makes it a good habitat to grow some small bushes or shrubs. And then after that, some small trees might come in. And then some larger trees start to grow after that. And so one set of organisms replaces another until eventually you get to a stage that's called the climax community. And that's what a forest is around here. It's sort of the end stages the stable community that you eventually reach. Now, if you were in the Midwest United States, if you were in Iowa and you left things untended, chances are it's not going to develop into a forest. No, it's going to maybe form a grassland. Or if you go to Nevada, it's different climate conditions. If you go to Nevada, it's going to become a desert. If you go to Guatemala, it's going to be a tropical rainforest. If you go to northern Canada, it might develop into a tundra. So depending on these conditions, different ecosystems form. And so this process, when species replace each other over time, that's called succession. If have you ever been anywhere, maybe if I don't know if you ever go hiking, where there's like just bare rock, there's no like soil or plants or anything? Yeah, right. So what I'm trying to get at is that even bare rock. So if you have bare rock, even bare rock can eventually become a living ecosystem. It takes a long time, but if you have, like, if you go hiking up Bald Mountain, for example, which is in like inlet up near Old Forge. If you go to the top of Bald Mountain, you see it's called Bald Mountain because it's like bare rock, right? There's not like trees and stuff at the top. Um, that kind of bare rock eventually can erode and start to form little bits of soil, and then like moss and other things can even grow on bare rock. And when they die and decompose, they start to build up a really thin layer of soil. And then some small grasses and things can come in. And when they grow and die, they add to the soil. And so over time, you can have a layer of soil building up and eventually go through this process, reaching a forest there. Those first things that can start to come in and live even on bare rock, that's called the pioneer species. Just like maybe in social studies, if you remember learning, like the pioneers, people that moved west as the United States was expanding. Pioneer species are organisms that can come in and live in these first stages of succession. To finish up, biomes. We just talked about this a little bit. Depending on the climate in an area. Today or in the first beginning of the year? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. We took your. Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot about that. Right. Thanks. Yeah, depending on climate, that's what determines the type of ecosystem that you have in an area. Where we live, for example, we have like pretty cold winters, pretty warm summers. We have a lot of precipitation throughout the year. And when you have those factors, the typical biome that will grow in those areas is a forest. If you go up north of us, even like not too far, and up mountains or up to like northern Maine into Canada, instead of the forest we have around here, the forest that is formed is often evergreen trees called the boreal forest. It's like if you think of a Christmas tree or like evergreen pine, spruce trees, but that's the dominant tree. Like we look out here, we might see a few of those, but that's not the dominant tree. Um, but in Yeah, that are the main species. If you continue going north into colder climates, you go to the tundra, where you have very little precipitation and it's cold year round. If you go south from where we are, if you go into um, the Midwest of the United States, we have grassland. We have deserts, in the Southwest United States, in Africa, in Asia. There's deserts. If we go around the tropics, we have tropical rainforests because there's a lot more rain and moisture, and there's higher temperatures. So because we have different climates all over the place, we have different ecosystems that form. You can see this shows sort of what the different biomes that form depending on precipitation and temperature. Those are the two main factors. There you have a list of all of them. And then finally, to finish, it is at the mountain lion. When we think about ecosystems, one of the things scientists often want to know is how diverse they are, their biodiversity. What does it mean? What does diverse mean? What is diversity or something like that? If I said we had a diversity of different lunch options this year. Yeah, it means variety. Good. So when we think about ecosystems, we can talk about biodiversity. That means how many different types of living things are there? Are there lots of different species? Or are there a few different species? It depends on the biome. Like, yeah, so deserts, good Kate. Deserts don't have a high biodiversity, right? There are things that live there, but there's not that many. What's an ecosystem that has a very high biodiversity? Yeah, the rainforest has a really high biodiversity. Yeah, yeah, plants and animals, exactly. That's why it has a high biodiversity. The oceans, coral reefs have a high biodiversity. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thousands. I know. And so the more species you have in an ecosystem, the more stable it is. If you only have, well, let's imagine something else. Imagine a cornfield. Does that have a high biodiversity? It's just basically corn plants growing, right? And so, because of that, if you have one disease that affects corn plants, it can spread rapidly and the ecosystem can be destroyed. But if you have many different types of living things, if you have a high biodiversity, then the ecosystem can be more stable, more resilient. What's happening to species on the earth due to human activities? Yeah, good. Humans are causing many species to become endangered or extinct. What's the difference between those? What, yeah, endangered. You're exactly right. Right. And they're like the word itself, endangered means they're in danger of becoming extinct. Yeah, good. And so humans, because of the things Isaiah just mentioned, maybe because of hunting, some species humans have hunted and they're now extinct. Like, well, the wolves are were well, they were extinct in that area. So there's two different things. Sometimes a species that used to live like in Yellowstone got hunted and is gone from Yellowstone, but there's some living other places. So that's not technically extinct. Yeah, so sometimes what true extinction means is every white rhino in the entire world, as far as we know, is gone. And then they're gone forever. Right? With the wolves, because there were some living in Canada, they could be brought back to Yellowstone and the population can be reestablished. Yeah, yeah, there's lots of animals that are Yeah, yeah, you're exactly right. And so the reasons for extinctions or endangerment is things Isaiah's talking about: climate change, pollution, hunting, reduction of habitat, right? Because as humans expand the areas we're living in, often we're reducing the habitat where these species live. Yeah, it doesn't have to be due to humans. In fact, extinctions have happened for the whole history of the earth. What's the one you probably think of? Yeah, dinosaurs, a huge group of animals that became extinct. Why? Yeah, because a meteor hit the earth, changed the earth's climate so radically that they could not adapt quick enough and did not survive. And so when a species does become extinct, it's not just that that species is lost. Right. Like right. And as we've been talking about over the last several days, everything in an ecosystem is linked together. So if one species is eliminated, that can affect many other species. Exactly, exactly. So that's why preserving species, preserving what we call biodiversity is important. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that at the end of this unit. We're going to stop. And sometimes though we can't predict, right? Sometimes we don't exactly know if a species is eliminated. Like when the wolves were eliminated, people didn't understand all of those connections, and so it was really hard to predict. Like, why would wolves have any effect on the fish or on beavers? They don't seem to be connected, but because everything in the ecosystem is linked, there are effects.